A big move for the media industry in Australia. The Albanese government introducing draft legislation that could impose financial penalties on tech giants like Google and Meta if they fail to establish commercial agreements with Australian news services. For more, let's head to Sydney. We're joined by Darren Woolley from Trinity P3. Obviously, we've been watching this tussle for quite some time between Facebook and Google, who have a huge portion of the Australian advertising spend, and now the big Australian media companies want it. And the government found themselves, I guess, stuck in the middle, but now they're making a move.
Yeah, well, as you remember, the Morrison government addressed this with the News Bargaining Code, which basically brought the two parties together, the major publishers and the platforms. And that was because largely the advertising dollars had drifted away from those news media sources or publishers to these platforms. And so their way of addressing that was to get them to pay and enter into agreements. That's finally come to an end with both the major platform players walking away. And so this is an attempt by the Albanese government to bring back in place without necessarily forcing it. What they're saying, it's a bit like private health insurance in Australia. Either you pay up platforms or we're going to institute a tax on you for not paying.
This is great for the big media companies, News Corp, obviously Nine and Nine newspapers. What about the smaller media companies who got nothing out of that Scott Morrison agreement and perhaps feel like this is an agreement that keeps the big dinosaurs big and dinosaur and the new players small and fighting for survival?
Yeah, and I think that's the big issue. It's getting more and more diverse is our media landscape, because technology, ironically, is the very thing that's making it possible for lots of voices to be heard as part of news media. And as we know, the news media is an important part of any democracy. You know, it's a pillar of democracy, and so should be supported. You're right in that the loudest voices, the biggest publishers, are the ones that are getting all the benefit here. And that was a problem before with the Morrison government and will continue to be a problem here, because really the government is responding to the very voices that they worry about and they listen to. And yet there's a huge diversity of voices now in news media that will not be covered by this and will continue to struggle.
And there are a huge growth in these platforms, not just TICKER, which I'm the founder of course, but also you look at the Daily Oz, you look at AusBiz, you look at all of these different companies employing journalists, trying to survive, not being able to rely on advertising because we just can't, we're too small and the agencies are too big. And we're in this transition point, right, where you've got these younger companies that are fighting, and isn't that how society and capitalism and our democracy is meant to work, to keep the big players in check, new small businesses come through? But if the government creates a system where the big players are protected, but the younger ones, the smaller ones aren't and can't get through and therefore fall over, and we've seen that more and more, it's not fair.
Well, look, in a true capitalist society, you would say that the more successful ones are where the money's going to go. But what we've seen here is marketers are not spending their money advertising in news media, even though the audience still holds up. And one of the reasons for that is that marketers perceive news media as high risk. You know, you can imagine if you're an airline and suddenly your ad appears next to a story about either a hijacking or a plane crash. You don't want that, and there's very little control you have in the digital advertising marketplace. Having said that, all the money has gone to Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, where they have no control either. You know, their ad could appear against something exactly the same or even worse, because as we know, the content there is not the responsibility of those platforms. The responsibility lies with the creator. It's an interesting conundrum, because ideally the government wouldn't need to be doing this if marketers continued to support news media by putting their ads where the audience is going. Because, you know, we're seeing a lot of traffic still goes to news media. Some of it, the biggest peaks we see when there's things like wars, inflation, recessions, things like this that people want to know. I think when you're talking about the small players and the independent players and the up-and-comers, the government has to acknowledge that having a diversity of voices is good for democracy. So if their argument is it's good for democracy, they should be supporting those small players as well. And that the list should go beyond the major publishers to all of those independents that are contributing to that conversation.
Yeah, it's such a fascinating topic, and partly because these smaller organisations don't have the legal teams and the means to be able to negotiate with the big companies as well, and don't feel like they have the support. You wonder whether there needs to be a bit more support to be able to come to an agreement en masse. All right, now big brands are increasing their spending on social media creators, but smaller firms still dominating the market, leaving many popular creators without the partnerships that they're actually seeking. Darren, what's this one about?
So again, this is the old media model of reach. Was the way that it worked. You would advertise where the most number of people were going, but the world's changed, and now we've got audiences segmented across lots of different, a minute ago we were talking about media outlets, news media. This time we're talking about influencers. And there is a shift that is slowly starting to happen where the major brands are saying, well, I could go with one of the big influencers or ambassadors, but what we're actually finding is that many of these, they're called micro or even nano influencers, collectively actually deliver better results for marketers and their businesses than some of these big well-known celebrities or online celebrities. So it's interesting, and technology is now starting to allow marketers to actually be able to work across a multitude of these micro influencers and getting better results. Yet, as a media and as an industry, we're still focusing on the big names like the Kardashians, Mr. Beast. It's not until you hit 200 or 300 million followers that suddenly you get publicized. And yet there's millions and millions of these smaller players that actually are offering huge value if marketers and their agencies are able to manage that and to find them and to utilize that connection. Because what we're seeing is while mass is delivered, reach is delivered with the big names, it's the smaller names that often have the more intimate relationship, the greater engagement from their audiences. I guess in a similar way, if we play it back to brand news media, in the similar way that TICKER does.
Well, it's about niches, and what I imagine happens in these agencies, and when I started TICKER, we didn't even bother with the agencies because I'm a journalist and I know what they're like. Yet they employ young staff, and I guarantee that those staff are not consuming the big media the way that their bosses did when they were their age, right? And the fact is that we're all on Instagram following people. We're all on YouTube with the recommendations as an algorithm which knows what we want. I can tell you the big networks do not make content that I want to watch these days. And so therefore I'm not watching it, I'm somewhere else. And if the agencies keep getting caught in those big market, as you say, the one show that reaches the big numbers of people, that cliff that they're heading towards is just getting closer and closer, surely. So is there not a way to be able to, I guess, work with a large number of creators that are perhaps trying to and are engaging and creating communities which you bring a sponsor into and marketers can actually tap that way? Do you see anyone doing that?
Ahron, that's the point. The technology is now available, and there's a number of platforms, but one of them is an Australian-grown business called Fabulate, which allows you to actually manage multitudes of content creators around the globe and actually then be able to align them and select them and manage and work with them to go beyond just throwing all your money into one basket, putting all your eggs in one basket, so to speak, and actually spread that across multiple small creators. But this is a slow process because people look at the numbers alone, and why wouldn't I go for a personality celebrity? Yes, they're going to cost me millions of dollars, but they have millions of followers. But do those followers, are they as engaged as a collection of smaller influencers that have a much tighter relationship? And that's the question that brands are going to have to answer. And the agencies need to step up and deliver if they're going to actually be able to utilize these small creators en masse.
All right, we've got to leave it there. Darren Woolley from Trinity P3. Always enjoy our conversations and debates. Talk to you soon.
Likewise. Thanks, Ahron.